Thank you for joining us at the Building Climate Resilience is Hong Kong Ready webinar, co-organized by Hong Kong Land and Business Environment Council, or BEC. I am Christy O from BEC's Policy and Research team and your host today. Now for a few housekeeping rules, today's seminar will be recorded. So please feel free to revisit the content when the webinar is later uploaded to BEC's website and YouTube channel. Participants are all muted by default. If you have any questions or comments for our speakers, please use the Q&A or chat functions at the bottom of your screen, and we will address them at the panel discussion. Without further ado, may I invite Mr. Simon Ng, Chief Executive Officer of BEC, to give us his opening remarks. Simon, please.
Thank you, Christy. Good morning. Thank you for joining this webinar on climate resilience. As individuals, we have all witnessed and experienced the impact of climate change on our daily lives. For corporates, extreme weather conditions and sea level rise would bring about physical damages to assets, business disruption, as well as other climate-related risks. We have no choice but to tackle climate change with ambition and action together. BEC has a track record of addressing climate change together with the business sector. In 2008, we set up the Climate Change Business Forum to inform business leaders the impact of climate change and to discuss means to tackle the challenge. We have demonstrated the business case of climate action through publications and events. We have launched the Low Carbon Charter in 2019 to mobilize businesses to set and achieve carbon reduction targets. We are also supporting members and the wider business community to turn pledges into action. With that, I want to congratulate Hongkong Land, a BEC Council member, for taking the lead to commission a study on climate risk assessment for Hong Kong, and for presenting the key findings of the study to our audience today. In the second half of the program, we will also hear from experts representing various sectors in a moderated panel discussion. I look forward to the sharing. I'm sure we will all learn from this event, but more importantly, I hope this event will raise awareness on climate risk to our city, the infrastructure and business operations, and trigger greater urgency to co-create solutions, to share information, and to strengthen public-private partnership in making Hong Kong climate-proof. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. May I also invite Mr. Andy Young, Director and Head of Technical Services and Sustainability, Hong Kong Land, for a welcoming note. Mr. Young, please.
Thank you, Christy. Good morning, and thank you all for attending today's Climate Risk webinar, co-organized by Business Environment Council and Hong Kong Land. It's been wonderful to collaborate with BEC as we come together with industry experts to share our experience and discuss what we can do together to combat climate change and manage its associated risks. In recent years, we have experienced the impacts of climate change with rising sea levels, extreme heat waves, and excessive rainfall, posing increased risks to our environment and the community. Indeed, the 2021 World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report ranked climate action failure as top risk by impact, second only to infectious disease due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Moreover, in terms of livelihood, both extreme weather and climate action failure rank among the world's top global risks for the third year in a row. It is clear there is a critical need for action. In 2021, the Hong Kong HKSAR Government has committed to address climate risk and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Some works are already in progress, including driving for energy and carbon reduction and reducing use of resources. In terms of physical risk, the government has also been updating codes, including drinking codes and systems, and is proceeding with coastal fortification work. However, at Hong Kong Land, we believe we should further accelerate our pace to enhance awareness and collaboration across different sectors and industries for climate risk adaptation and mitigation. In today's webinar, you will hear from the Hongkong Land team and AECOM team on the results of our portfolio climate risk assessment. But we will also welcome industrial leaders who are at the cutting edge of efforts to address climate change and risk management. I hope you are all as excited as I am for what's to come today, and that by the end of the webinar, you have an even better understanding of the current risks we face and some actionable ideas on how you and your organization can address them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. To kickstart the webinar, please welcome Mr. Ryan Lee, Technical Services and Sustainability Manager of Hongkong Land, to give us the overview of the recently completed study on climate risk assessment for Hong Kong. Mr. Lee, please.
Thank you. And before coming into the, let me introduce some background information about our company, Hongkong Land. So actually, we got a purpose statement to inspire, support, and empower the community of today, and so that together we can aspire to a better tomorrow. So this is our purpose statement of Hongkong Land. So actually, we are a developer and actually also a property manager. So focus on business, primarily office, retail, and residential across the 18 cities in Asia. So we got a sustainability mindset. So that's why when we design our buildings and from actually to the operation and also with all the decision making in our company, actually we got this mindset during the process. So that's why we would like to create more sustainable community. So together with all the stakeholders. So you may not know, actually we are the early mover with the sustainability DNA. For example, actually we are the first bridge builder between the Princess Building and Mandarin Oriental. So what is the difference between that? So you can see in Central, we can see this concept is duplicated around the buildings. So which offers linking the buildings so pedestrian can move between the building in a more comfortable and safety way. And also the building is quite close to the public transportation, which is in line with the, we say the TOD, transit-oriented development concept, which is one of the sustainability concept for development. So you may not know, actually, Hong Kong is one of the pioneer for using the seawater cooling in 1984, which is most of the people are using the air cool for the air conditioning system. So we are also the co-founder of Hong Kong's first green building assessment scheme, Hong Kong Beam. And actually, we also achieved all the building in our central portfolio with the highest platinum rating for existing building. So in recent years, so actually we also commit to the science-based target. So that's why our DNA for sustainability is going to evolve. So some people ask why we need to take the climate risk. So actually maybe from daily life, you may already experience extreme weather, which causes physical damage and also the disruption to business. Meanwhile, actually this is not only about the environmental effect, actually it's about the social, economic impact as well. So for example, actually many countries committed to the carbon neutrality, most of them commit by 2050. So it's actually, which will tightening the policies and regulations. So how you are going to prepare for this policy and the regulations, which may also affect your business operation. The next one is actually the climate risk is also financial risk. So actually the investor and regulator demand for more transparency and disclosure of your climate risk. For example, the insurer actually may increase your insurance because your building are facing severe climate risk for the physical impact. So that's why I heard that some of the location, actually the insurer may not be insurable for the building. So we call that's a stranded asset. The next one, we can think about when the people increase awareness on the climate change. So actually they are shifting their mindset to a low carbon product and services. So if we are stay at the same as usual, so actually we are losing your business. And also actually you need to tackle and reputational risk because of when all the people are migrating to a low carbon economy. Meanwhile, you're lag behind. So what you about the reputational risk on that? Of course, all talking about the risk. So actually, let's think in other way, more positive and more proactive way is how we can make use of this climate change actually as an opportunity for your development, and actually how to contribute to as a low carbon economy. For example, you may expand your business to have the new low carbon services or new carbon product which contribute to climate change. So meanwhile, actually you can also better manage your business and improve the resilience of your business. So I think it's better we treat the climate change as an opportunity rather than a risk. So here I will have some overview about our climate risk assessment. So Dr. Thomas Tang will share with you more about the finding in detail and suggest some of the recommendations for collaboration across industries. So in our assessment, actually we cover strategic assets across Hong Kong Land's operation regions. So actually we conduct climate risk and develop climate adaptation and mitigation plan. So based on the prioritized risks and opportunities. So we have completed climate risk about 2 years ago. So based on the TCFD recommendation, which is a task force on climate-related financial disclosure. So we also disclose our finding starting from the 2020 substantive report. So in the assessment, we cover both the physical risk and transactional risk. So physical risk, that means that it's about the rising sea level, which is the physical impact we could see and observe, some of the change in the precipitation, some of the flooding issue. Meanwhile, transition risk actually take us to more long term, which is leading to the low carbon economy, or actually we are talking about net zero economy. So after that, actually we developed a mitigation plan. So before going into the detail, we conduct a climate scenario analysis. So that means that actually what is a scenario we would like to identify different type of risks. So we pick up two most stringent scenario. So for the physical risk, we pick up the RC 8.5. That means it's a business as usual. So in this scenario, it's most likely to increase the intensity and severity of the extreme weather events. So for the transition risk, we take the RCP 2.6, which is quite aligned with the Paris Agreement, and also we request for the most accelerated and aggressive mitigation response to curb the emissions. So once we decide the scenario, actually we identify more than 70 physical and transition risks and opportunities. So we classify with different categories and timing and applicable regions. And also we view our existing controls and then prioritize those risks and opportunities. So we classified the adaptation and mitigation plan into 4 themes. So you can see the theme 1 actually and theme 2. So which are about the established climate resilient commitment from our corporation, and also the climate resilient strategy, design and planning, which is under control of the corporation. Meanwhile, in other 2 themes is about the collaboration with external stakeholders and also with the collaboration with the government. For example, have the emergent data and trend, show how this data and trend will help us to predict and actually to conduct climate risk assessment. So we can see that climate risk is not an corporation or even not a government issue. So that's why actually it's about the individual. So we need to collaborate across different sectors, so across industry, and across different regions to combat the climate risk. Meanwhile, we rely on the government regulations and all the regulators and advancement of the technology. Maybe we need to think about how we could change our behavior, actually, which could speed up to actually manage this of the climate risk as well. So in follow session, I will hand over to Dr. Tang, so to share about the finding in our climate risk assessment, and then maybe suggest some of the collaboration initiatives actually we would need to take action immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Up next, we have Dr. Thomas Tang, Executive Director, Land Supply and Municipal of AECOM, who will share with us the key findings of the study. Dr. Tang, please.
Preface this. Okay, let me preface this by saying, I suspect a lot of you in the audience are familiar with climate change, and perhaps a number of you are from the real estate and property sector. So some of the information that I'll be sharing with you may actually be familiar to some degree. So don't fear. I will not linger on too much detail on this in the interest of time. But what I will try to do is to kind of give you a bit of an overview, and kind of at the end of this, there'll be a very clear call for action, because I believe that we know the subject, where I believe that we are familiar with some of the challenges that are presented, but where we're lacking is sometimes just the actions that follow. And if any of you have been following the news, that in November in COP26 in Glasgow, there was a lot of call for action. And interestingly enough, there was a call for action on the finance sector as well. So my hope is that some of you watching this, or some of you may know others watching this who are actually involved in the finance sector. In the COP26, there was the Global Network Alliance for the finance sector, which stood up and said very, very clearly that there's a huge challenge facing us, and we have to do it in collaboration. So perhaps that reinforces the other point that Ryan said, that a lot of this stuff has to be done in collaboration. Okay, so let's just move on first of all. I want to share with you some information just to set the scene about the challenges of climate change. And this picture here, I think you recognize from the writing on the bus here, it's actually Bangkok. Bangkok is rated as one of the world's most vulnerable cities to sea level rises. A fifth of the city was reported underwater in 2011 due to flooding. This is a picture of New Orleans. Roughly half of New Orleans is below sea level. And then I'll finish this off with a kind of popular picture that people have probably seen on postcards, but Venice is actually sinking at the rate of 1 millimeter a year. Now, according to a peer-reviewed study of more than 5.5 million in Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and Georgia, in other words, the East Coast, sea level rise flooding has caused a total value of $7.4 billion of loss. Now, this is the evidence that's very clearly and starkly facing us right now that were applied in the study. I'm not going to go over them in great detail, but these are the two main ones that were referred to, representative concentration pathways 8.5 and 2.6. And these were the ones that were used for the modeling and coming up with the climate adaptation and mitigation plans here. And we have the ones in between. But I want to focus on the 8.5 one, because really the 8.5 one gives us a very stark reminder in terms of how Hong Kong is going to deal with this. I mean, you could see that temperature increase. We're looking at temperature increases of 5.5 degrees C. Climate projections. I'll single out Cat 4 to Cat 5 typhoons. You can see the middle line there. Cat 4 refers to the speed of a typhoon, and according to the official definition, Cat 4 is 240 kilometers per hour. Mangkhut, for your information, was 285 kilometers per hour. So you could see the sort of impacts that we're experiencing at the moment. And of course, we have extreme rainfall and related flooding. And I think one of the things that we must be conscious of is that how much of Hong Kong actually is exposed. We have critical infrastructure, such as the MTR, which is actually underground. So bear that in mind in terms of some of the related challenges to sea level rise and flooding. So as I said, just as a recap to the study that AECOM did for Hongkong Land, some of the modeling that we came up with was looking at sea level rise, roughly about 0.32 meters to 0.55 meters by the year of 2051 to 2060, but in a longer term, up to 1.28 meters. The intensity of rainfall and typhoons will increase, causing asset damage and flooding, affecting business operations. And there's some studies that were done in Mangkhut, which looked at the actual losses, which the insurers had to pay up for. But equally, there was a statistic that said something like $800 million was lost per day because of the discontinuity of business. So there's a lot of related kind of damages and losses that we have to take into account. And lastly, the annual temperature will be rising by 1.5 to 3 degrees by 2051 to 2060, and 3 degrees to 6 degrees by 2091 to 2100. These may sound kind of small figures, but let me assure you, I mean, in terms of the significance of these differences, particularly when you look at things like humidity and dew point reflections, some of this will have very grave effects on human health. Okay, but let me turn to something a bit more cheerful. We have the Hong Kong government response, which again, AECOM as a company, we're quite privileged to be working with both sides, with the private sector and with the government. And we can share here that there is quite a lot going on from the government perspective, such as strengthening infrastructure, doing the projections on tropical cyclones, studying how government infrastructure will cope with some of these severe conditions, reducing flood risk. I mean, again, we've invested billions in terms of infrastructure in creating master drainage plans that will remove water as quickly as it alights, and contingency plans for transport systems, natural disasters, and of course, emergency alert systems. So government is in action on this, and I suspect a number of you are very familiar with the Hong Kong Climate Action Plan, which commits us to goal carbon neutrality before 2050. I believe Ryan referred to that. And this is in line with a lot of other countries. A lot of other cities have also looked at this goal, and 2050, 2060, thereabouts is really where we want to look at, getting past peak levels and coming down towards net zero. We have four major strategies. Net zero electricity generation, which thankfully our electricity suppliers, China Light and Power and Hong Kong Electric, are on top of. But then incumbents on perhaps what's related to this talk, the property sector, looking at energy saving and green buildings, and of course, looking at green transport. And all linked with this is a kind of our lifestyle changes, which is very much predicated in terms of how much we consume and how much we dispose of. So you can see on the left-hand side, whilst the top heading is the Climate Action Plan, supporting it underneath are three very important studies that also are aimed at transforming our situation: the waste blueprint, the clean air plan, and the document on electric vehicles. So next 15 to 20 years, the government will spend something like $240 billion, which is about US 30 billion, to take forward various measures on climate change and mitigation. And I think topically, you'll all been aware of the green retail bond that the government issued, which is 3 times oversubscribed. Again, the signs are there. We are stirring, we are moving forward. And lastly, the Office of Climate Change and Carbon Neutrality, which was set up last year, really now needs to get engaged. Really now we need to kind of find ways and mechanisms that it could truly reach out and help them reach out to the stakeholders, including the private sector. Okay, I think I'm on time, am I? Just do a quick time check. Okay. So let's talk about business. I'd like to spend the rest of my talk just talking about business. And as you can see there, business really faces impacts in different forms. I mean, let alone the severity of COVID-19 and all of the effects that the pandemic has on our economy. We also have to bring climate change into this picture. And as you could see from the left-hand side, that's a document by the Hong Kong Exchange, which talks about guidance on climate disclosure. So in other words, in terms of corporate performance, in terms of social responsibility and environmental responsibility, I guess the way I'm going towards is ESG, which is now becoming very topical for a number of companies. Climate risk also needs to be put in perspective on this. And TCFD, which Ryan earlier referred to, is got a set of recommendations which really instructs and directs companies on how to report. There's continued pressure in the meantime to look at high performance buildings, and we no longer talk about green buildings, we talk about net zero carbon buildings. I mean, these are everything that's on the drawing board now for anything that's coming up. And then I think the last one, which is an interesting factor, is the fact that future of work is changing. According to a survey in the US, it's something like 42% of people now work from home. And you just think of that in terms of extrapolation across the world. Our offices going to be different, very different. Commercial properties, residential properties, are they going to be very different in the future? And how do we design for that, taking into account climate change? So we have physical risks and transition risks. In the interest of time, I won't go through these, but these are well defined within the TCFD document. And really, these are the types of risks that from the physical side, what we see, what will impact us immediately and tangibly, and the transition risks, which companies need to bear in mind, linked to market, policy, and reputation risks. Cost of failure, I think this is actually a no-brainer. It's increased capital costs, reduced revenues, opportunity loss of green finance, potential litigation. Some of these things are now emerging, and there was a recent article by The Economist, which actually talks about citizens taking governments to court because of lack of action. But let's just keep the discussion on the property sector. Building performance is likely to be affected by ongoing changes to the energy mix. I think when we have the panel later on, there will be opportunity to speak a bit more about that. But equally on the right-hand side, the opportunities are there, to get access to capital. ESG is not something that's just been promoted for the sake of it. It actually now has become quite an important tool and a benchmark that investors and the financial sector are looking at. I'm going to finish off with a quick case study, the Singapore case study, and because I'm not an advocate for Singapore, so please don't mistake me as the Singapore tourism ambassador here. That's not my role, but I would like to kind of point out some of the things that Singapore, that we can learn from, that we can emulate. 30% of Singapore lies less than 5 meters above the mean sea level. So in other words, what it says is that Singapore is actually quite exposed. Hence, the land reclamation was raised from 3 meters to 4 meters above the Singapore height datum in 2011. So that makes sense, make it higher. And protect your critical infrastructure, such as Changi Airport, Tuas Port. And interestingly enough, if you actually go around Singapore, you'll find that there's a construction of walls and stone embankments, which covers 70 to 80% of its coastline. Now, you might think, okay, well, we're building a fortress, but that's not exactly true. A lot of the pilot projects that they're doing around Singapore, they actually look at eco-shorelines, which is about supplanting some of the concrete with natural resources, such as mangroves and wetlands. There's also been this technology from Holland, which has been around for centuries and centuries, called polders, where you actually build seawalls and use them to protect low-lying land. And that was something that was explored when we were looking at the artificial islands in Lantau. So there are options there. And perhaps the last thing that's worth leaving you with is the call to action. Because at the end of the day, we have all these great ideas, but what do we do with them? So step one is really about, we got to work together. We got to kind of come up with a solution. So lobbying government to set up a centralized liaison body for climate risks. I think we're halfway there, 75% of the way there, because the office has already been established. Singapore's office was established in 2012, which was an interministerial body. Our hopes are that this office that is now being established will follow similar lines in terms of cutting across lines of departments and looking at responsibility and accountability in different shapes. I think step two is really about let's share the information, because there is a lot of information out there. And information is only useful when you can act on it. So requesting the government to advise the public as what's being done, as well as providing updated climate change data, will actually serve to motivate and galvanize a lot of sectors of society. And I guess a crisis management plan, those of us who remember Banquet can remember, the kind of confusion and somewhat panic that ensued as a result of it. And then what do we do after it, when all the damage and the trees and everything were blocking roads, et cetera, there needs to be a crisis management plan, which I'm sure there is in form, but was slow to enact. And lastly, I think this is an appeal that is very relevant to the BEC and its audience and its members, is that let's share data, because I think we are kind of bound up sometimes in competitive notions that I don't really want to tell people in my sector about what I'm doing, because I would lose an edge in there. I think those days are somewhat dated. And I think especially for climate change, any best practices in energy saving, protection, resilience, green buildings, all of this information should be readily shared. So I think, am I doing for time? Okay, all right, I'm getting the nod from the desk there. So I'm going to wrap up with this. And again, my thanks to BEC and my thanks to Hongkong Land. My thanks to you as an audience for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Tang. Now let's move on to the panel discussion. And if you have any questions for the speakers, please feel free to type your questions using the Q&A function. May I invite Engineer C.F. Leung, Director, Operations of BEC, to moderate the panel discussion and introduce our four panelists. Yes, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you, Christy, for introduction. So maybe my name is C.F. Leung. I'm the Director of Operations of BEC. Here we have a strong panelist in this panel today. So from my right hand side is Dr. Thomas Tang from AECOM. And next to me is Ms. Jessica Chen from MTR. We have also two panelists online who are Ms. Judy Wong from NWS Holding and engineering Dr. Shirley Chow from she's the adjunct associate professor from Hong Kong UST, right? So let's get some warm-up question before we get started, right? So my first question may be to Jessica and Judy. So I know that you are working in a large corporate, right? So can you please introduce your business and what are your plans to address the climate risk and anything you are going to do to mitigate the risk, right? Jessica first, maybe.
Okay. Well, hi, I'm Jessica Chen, Head of Sustainability of MTL Corporations. I think MTL is no stranger to all of you, and most of you have used our networks for commuting every day. And I hope you enjoy our new service of our Leaveswell line called Harbour Section service, opened early this week. And our core business is actually constructions and operating with mass transit passenger services in Hong Kong and also in UK, Sweden, Australia, and mainland China. We carry over 13 million passenger journey worldwide every weekday. And apart from our railway services, our business also covers station commercial businesses and development and sales of residential and commercial properties in partnership with property developers, and also provisions of property management services in Hong Kong and also in mainland China. So basically, these are our business around the world. And in terms of climate change, well, actually, we recognize the climate imperative for business, and we take a risk-based approach and include all the climate risks in the enterprise risk. And we identify, monitor, review, and update all our climate risk under our enterprise risk management framework. And also we review and update it annually and report to our enterprise risk committee and also the executive committee annually. So basically, in MTL, we all, from top management and our business unit, we all well aware of the climate risk that we are facing. And in our operation, actually, we have already done a lot in terms of, building climate resilience and also reducing the climate risk. And for climate carbon reduction, actually, we have just announced that we will setting science-based target for 2030 very soon. And in terms of climate resilience, for example, in 2020, we have already done a climate change and adverse weather impact studies to reveal the impacts that reference events will on the access and on our railway assets in our operations. So through the studies, we have revealed identify the high risk areas under different scenarios and also different aspects such as landslide, strong wind, temperature, flooding, and so on. And through these studies, we have already developed some detailed action plans to enhance our adaptations and mitigation measures. And also, we have already implemented some enhanced programs in our operations. And recently, we have commenced a high-level diagnostic studies on climate risk to reveal the current assets that we have in the railway operation and also in our property assets to see if there's any high risk level that we are exposed in terms of climate change. And through these studies, we will reveal, using different RCP pathway and also in different time horizon to identify the high potential risk areas that we have in our portfolio. So through this study, hopefully we can identify the areas that we can further plan our in-depth studies on our climate scenarios plan. So basically, this is what we are doing for now.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Julie, how about you? We know that NWS is a big corporation covering different types of business, right? So anything you can share with us, right?
Surely. Perhaps a quick introduction of NWS Holdings. It is a limited company, listed company, sorry, with a diversified industry flagship of the New World Development. And we invest and operate a wide range of businesses, predominantly in Hong Kong and the mainland. And our core business includes toll roads, construction, and insurance, while we also manage a strategic portfolio spanning sectors from logistics to facilities management. So in terms of of how we manage our risk on climate risk, right? I think broadly speaking, to start off, we have a strong governance that we have the policies and the targets set, and we have our own 2030 sustainability targets, including like green, wellness, and caring, and among which we have the climate-related targets, including the carbon and energy intensity targets, reducing 50% by 2030, comparing to 2013. And this is a regional, to get started target. And then we have also the policies in place, sustainability policies, the climate change policy, and our board of directors has strong oversight on the directions on how we develop our sustainability strategy, and also also monitor our performance. And our CEO is actually the chairman of the sustainability committee. So we do have a very strong oversight on this aspect. And we have also looked into the diversified funding sources through sustainable financing to support our resilience measures implementation and all that. At the end of 2021, we have over 4 million Hong Kong dollars in sustainable financing through loans and also performance bonds, etc. And then I think the next step is also like how we do try to understand the risk that we maybe pose to. So we have self-assessment. We have piloted a climate scenario study to assess the physical climate risk at one of our managed property, the Hong Kong CEC. Which I'm sure everybody is familiar with. And then and starting this year, we are about to begin also our road operation, our infrastructure of roads in the mainland China. It is something, it's quite a big project for us, in fact, because our roads, we have a number of roads and they are all over the mainland. So that'll be quite a lengthy project for us. And then last year, we have also conducted the first climate-related transition risk assessment for our key businesses that we looked into risk, including, policy and legal, market risk, reputational risk, and technology risk, among our core businesses. So we can share a bit more if anyone is interested later on. And then we continue to monitor our performance and disclosure, annual report in our, our websites. And we have also established strong collaborations with our suppliers. For example, how do we manage our construction emissions on site, and also, how we support, pilot projects in waste management with other startup companies on waste, circularity, etc. And so, and also we continually to build awareness among our stakeholders internally and externally with our suppliers, for example. So there's a whole list of methodology that we are trying to take care of the risk within the company. Yeah, so just a brief high level to share with you all.
All right, thank you, Julie. Before asking strategy, may I ask Thomas one question first, right? So I'm interested to know how long you take required for completing the task, completing the Hongkong Land project. You have addressed different, if my memory is correct, it's around 70-something risks identified, right?
Yes.
So what's the time required? Also for the climate risk, so from the point of view, is it a qualitative assessment or quantitative assessment, right? So a little bit more on this topic.
To be honest, Ryan would probably be the best person to answer that question, but let me have a go at it. I mean, a lot of this work was done aligned with the reporting requirements of Hongkong Land. So we had to fit in with certain milestones that they had to achieve. So we probably took about 6 to 9 months. Ryan, does that be about right? Yeah. In terms of the opportunities and risks, some of it was qualitative as a necessity, because sometimes the metrics and some of these things are difficult to gauge. But where we could, I mean, studying physical risks, which is a lot easier to measure, because that we can actually see, energy consumption, water consumption, resources, a lot of that could be related back. The transition risks are a little bit harder to quantify, because that's always a kind of a corporate estimate. But I guess if we were to pursue this in rigor, I mean, it would then we'd have to look down the value chain and look at things like insurance premiums, because that always focuses the mind. Because if you can relate risk to insurance and, in terms of the impacts on your premiums that you pay, then you're starting to get attention. So we don't have a lot of quantitative data. We do have quantitative data, but mostly on the physical risk side, I guess, is the answer to that.
All right. Thank you, Thomas. Right. Well, so Shirley, my question to you is that I know you teach a lot of different sustainability related topics, right? So are you going to include the climate risk assessment in the syllabus of the Hong Kong USD, right?
Thanks, Steve. Very good question. Now, I think as the whole sector, infrastructure as well as real estate, we are very focused on the net zero greenhouse gas emission. However, climate risk, I think, represent a systematic material risk as to the sector, as Thomas presented it here. And I think you guys all agree with me that the uniqueness or the complex features of climate risk actually show a major that challenge is how we can actually accurately capture the impact of climate risk, right? So as an educator, as you mentioned, as well as a carbon consultant, I want to point out three things, I think, high levelly. One is capacity building. I think due to the complexity of these climate risks, I see at least, we see a huge, we call capacity gaps, the gaps between the needs the practitioners, innovators, the developers, here the investors, the lenders, and the climate capabilities, right? So that capacity building at various levels, I think, is a key missing here in Hong Kong as well as in this region. We all know that HKUST and HKGFA Green Finance Association, they start working together, but very from the green finance or finance perspective. Why I do think climate change still missed out from that overall the map. And my second and third point, maybe we can discuss later. I don't want to take a lot of airtime. So that could be, my third point could be on the data availability. And also what a model, how model will be reliable. When we take all these words forward, whether like Dr. Thomas said, qualitative, quantitative, what are the maturity, what are data, and what will be very reliable modeling to let us move forward. So that is not capacity building, that is exactly as an engineer, I'm training as an engineer, right? We need something to really, how we can predict, project, and how we can take up all this data. And that is second point. I think later we can have a further discussion if time permits. And the third, of course, the very important is advocacy. And that is also private-public partnership. You can see from, I think, from Newport, from MTR, from AECOM, as well as from BEC. However, there is a missing point. I think we also should discuss later, if possible, that whether our city government has a very important role here and how that form a PPP. We always said private partner, public partnership. So that's my three things as an educator, as well as a carbon consultant for my perspective, capacity building, data model availability and the reliability, as well as PPP. I stop here and then we can have a later discussion if needed.
All right, thank you, Shirley. So from all the panelists, what is your desire? What the government can help to the Hong Kong citizen to address the climate risk, right? What's your aspiration? Can you start with Thomas?
How much time do you have? I've got a long list.
5 minutes, right? But I will only reserve 5 minutes for you.
All right, just joking. No, I think the government can play a large role in this. But what we have to be very conscious of is weaning ourselves off the dependency on the government to provide everything. I just pick up Shirley's point there. I mean, the whole notion of partnerships needs to be expanded. And we have to build in relationships and trust between the private sector and the public sector and the NGO sector in order to come up with solutions that can fulfill our needs. I think as well, we need to be a bit bolder in some of our ideas, the innovation. I'll give you an example. For instance, carbon capture. As you know, we've looked at carbon capture, and it's a very expensive process because it involves cryogenic freezing, basically, of fumes. Actually, there's simpler solutions to it where you can use carbon to cure concrete. I mean, that's being done quite readily now in certain places in the world. And it's just innovation, simple solutions like that we push forward, which benefits everyone in the long term. Now, the problem that we face now, not let me rephrase this, the situation that we face in Hong Kong is that sometimes we're kind of prevented from going ahead with some of these innovations because of safety regulations, because of certain building codes, because of certain kind of institutional arrangements that are there for a reason, but sometimes don't help us in terms of getting innovation out there. And I think government could actually do us a big favor by emulating the Singapore model, because Singapore, again, I'm not an ambassador for Singapore tourism, so please don't take my words out of context, but Singapore have this notion of living labs, living laboratories. Now, I know the Science Park, and I know Shelley is certainly very familiar with this. Science Park actually encourages this kind of experimentation, and we've looked at new technologies, new innovations, because a lot of what we do, if we want to reach carbon zero by 2050, other than changes in the fuel mix, we do have to look for other aspects, other solutions that we can come up with. And innovation has to drive that. Innovation tends to be inspired when you have a space, the open space to be able to create and come up with ideas and that. Now, I'll throw in another notion, which is co-creation, because innovation is best fostered when you have different stakeholders involved in it. So government, private sector, all the innovators come together. I know MTR has an innovation team. I'll leave you to talk about that. But certainly, I've been very impressed by some of the stuff that team has come up with. And I believe some of the property developers as well, have innovation teams. But the common thing that from us as a consulting point of view that we keep hearing is that sometimes they're prevented by building codes, or sometimes prevented by regulations that are there, as I said, for a reason, but need to be a little bit more flexible in terms of how you can take it forward. So that's my first point. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Jessica? Yeah.
I think I agree with Thomas about for a corporation, we have to think about what we can do to enhance our climate resilience in terms of innovation and other stuff. And Thomas just mentioned that we have a very strong team about innovation. In the future, we will work more closely with more startups in Hong Kong to see what kind of innovation, innovative idea that we could have in terms of enhancing our climate resilience. But then back to CF's question about what government can do. I think, well, for now, government have already demonstrated a very good example by, publishing the Climate Action Plan 2050 in terms of, reducing the carbon emissions in Hong Kong. And the government have already leading a very, leading by example in a very good way to lead the whole Hong Kong to decarbonize. But then for climate resilience, I think the government can have a very similar, take the very similar actions, because there are very broad topics and more different parties in Hong Kong, and we do need a very holistic approach to see how we can enhance the overall resilience in Hong Kong instead of just the corporation doing their own bit by bit. And I think the holistic approach is more useful to help the whole Hong Kong to go forward to build climate resilience. And I can give you one example that about Shelley mentioned about the data, the importance of data. Because I mentioned that we have done different studies on climate resilience, and we have done ones back to 2020, and then we have now doing a more holistic one for all our premises. But then when we reveal the data and the results from different studies, and even the CEDD's publications released recently about the coastal hazard of Hong Kong, we see that different cases, or this, I would say some discrepancies when we identify the high risk level location that we have to, look into the improvement. And I think this will demonstrate that different parties are using different data. And of course, for now, for most of the consultants, they have their own models, and they are using worldwide or regional data to conduct these kinds of studies. But then this will bring, different, this discrepancy about the results. And I think if different corporations using different models, and this will have a different pictures, for us to plan the future works for building our climate resilience. So I think, government taking the lead is to plan the overall, or coordinate with different parties or stakeholders in Hong Kong is important or crucial in these areas.
What Jessica means is that the standardized climate risk assessment procedure need to be formulated,
not
particularly
exactly
for Hong Kong use, right?
Not exactly the procedure, but then the data, because I think the government have done some, studies or assessment in these areas, as mentioned by Thomas. We have done some projects with the government about these areas, and then if the government can share some of this information to us, so that we can, when we do our own assessment for our own premises, and we can, based on this local data, to assess our climate risk. I think it is much more, reliable and accurate when we plan, for our, resilience plan.
Okay, thank you. So Julia and Shirley, as an engineer, right, what's your perspective on acquiring the accurate data to do the assessment, right? So any comment on this issue?
Sure, perhaps I follow up a little bit on Jessica's comment on data as well. As a corporate who has began conducting, different climate scenarios, assessment and all that, I totally see where that's coming from because, for example, our projects in the mainland China, I mean, even in Hong Kong, it could perhaps be a little bit better because we have Hong Kong Observatory. We could, when we're doing the climate models, that kind of data is more readily available, I think. But then if our roads are, operating in the mainland and how accessible the kind of data is to us, to have it validating whatever climate models our consultants are using, it would be very helpful because I think right now majority of those climate models, correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas, but I think they are based on the global data. They have it scaled down to the regional level that our premise is, right? So what kind of accuracy there is for us to really accurately to see how the impact it could be to our business, to our premises, it varies, right? And also and I think because we're also spending quite a bit of money on conducting this kind of assessment analysis, and if the actual result coming out, I don't think we're just doing that for reporting purposes to disclose it in accordance to TCFD, but I really want to have something that is useful for our operations to really to mitigate the potential, what if scenarios of climate change to our infrastructures, to our buildings. So that I think it is kind of challenging to me, but I think what we're doing now is just use what's best available right now and do our assessment. So if it could get to a good enough granularity, that would be real helpful. So if there's any further collaboration between different academia, public, private, in sharing more of the data, Hong Kong, GBA, that would be quite helpful, I think, in general, for us to conduct that kind of assessment further in the future.
So Shirley, are you going to provide us more useful data from academia, right?
I found a few points, data and the government. Now, I see the climate resilience, when we talk about climate resilience, we talk at different levels. Asset level, building levels, as Julie mentioned, portfolio levels, the whole portfolios of your property portfolio, as well as community city level. I see very clearly from different players as a commercial real estate, especially not the residential building, I haven't mentioned that adaptive climate measures already have been incorporated, some in the design stage. Okay, regarding the climate risk, but physical climate risk has never ever been a deal-breaking factor currently for any property investment here in Hong Kong or in this region. So the short period of the holding period, the investment period, the limited incentive, especially the lack of availability of data challenge. I think that the whole sector is facing that when we address physical climate risk. And because of that lack of the reliability, the data, the reliable data, and also future scenario, future projection here in Hong Kong, the single building cannot make the big decision for that. Okay, that needs a role for investment, as well as the city level, the government, basically, their policy as well as the regulation. That's my very strong point of view. I want to emphasize, I think Hong Kong government has a political risk here, especially when they should actually move very faster. Now, for example, you can add a lot of terms, if possible, in the new development. For example, some very outspoken conditions, tender requirement, whether it be 15 years, 100 years, 25 years, for example, safety safety factors, the city level adaptive infrastructure government should have more investment. City government is most critical for climate resilience adaptation in terms of policy and systems that I want to emphasize. In Hong Kong, we all know that we have very nice harbor view, right? Harbor front, central district, business district. That also is a real concern. When we talk about sea level rising, we talk about flooding, coastal flooding. Hong Kong is the #1, okay? Flooding, sea level rising, storm surge. And the government together with, of course, the business community here, no matter consultant, no matter educator, no matter the private sectors, as well as a public infrastructure as well. And that we need a lot of additional mitigation to ensure then the storm water and the storm surge will not happen. If happening, we have something. And that, I think Thomas is correct, that Singapore is a very good example. Just for that small perspective, okay, we're talking about coastals. So that's why I think data, yes, the government plays a very important role in terms of policy and regulation. Last but not least, I want to emphasize on one thing from commercial perspective, especially for the banks like New World and maybe all the listing company issuers here in Hong Kong, that's top-down approach with policy regulation. For example, mandates ETCFD reporting, as well as mandate taxonomy of the sustainable finance, that also plays a very important role. So yes, data, government issues, the government basically they need to do anything, a lot of things together with all the market. In Hong Kong, we are very difficult. You ask government to set a system. Government can only set the policy and regulation. The whole assessment methodology, the system should be from the market force, as we are all here. Then the mandatory disclosure, that is also very important too, I think. So that is my 2 cents.
All right, thank you, Shirley. Right, yeah. I know that the participant has asked a few questions, right, for Ryan. May I also invite Ryan to come to the stage to answer a few questions? Can you show me the iPad, right? Sorry, thank you. Thank you, Ryan. This is a special, right? Because I saw lots of questions. Right. So I just tried to ask a few from the participant, right? Yeah. So one question for you is quite straightforward, right? Why do you use 2 different RCP when addressing the physical and the transitional risk, right? So actually, again, try to answer. So actually, Thomas maybe supplement a little bit more. So actually, we are using the 2 different RCP. Means that actually, when we talk about RCP, means that what is the scenario, what is the future anticipate will happen. So actually, for example, when we use the RCP 2.6, that means that it's a lot of for the transitional risk. That means that a lot of the measures from the government and regulator actually to push the community to achieve the actually within 2 degrees Celsius scenario. So that means that actually no matter you think what you think, actually you need to take action because the government already issued the regulation and actually is tightening the law, and actually so that's why you are moving this direction. So that's why we make the RCP 2.6, because it's the most stringent if it happens that the government got the determination to achieve the low carbon community. So that's why they were moving in this direction. And other effect is that if the government, the community is not taken immediate action, so that's in other directions, that means that we will take the physical risk, experience the physical risk. That means that extreme weather continues. So actually that will impact our business as a business as usual. So that's why 8.5 is the most severe scenario which we do not would like to see happening in future. But actually, when we do the risk assessment, actually we need to get prepared for the worst. So that's why when we pick up the 2 scenario, we need to have the 2 different scenario for the analysis. All right. Another question for you is that have you shared the results to your tenants, right? What is their response or any feedback from the tenants, right? So I think actually we share our result based on the TCFD recommendation in our subsidiary report. So actually the tenant can refer to the subsidiary report, actually get the information there. So I think currently most of the disclosure is based on the recommendation of TCFD. So of course I would anticipate is a more increasing demand on the disclosure on this kind of risk as well. And one for Thomas is that the report addressed that the sea level rise and the water scarcity disclosed the physical risk by Hongkong Land. So I'm not sure whether the details of the report also address the risk level of flooding and extreme wind situation in your report, right?
Yeah, I can answer that one. Basically, a risk assessment looks at all aspects of physical risk, which is what Brian was alluding to. So RCP 8.5 already pictures the scenarios concerning elevated temperatures, sea level rise, flooding, et cetera, et cetera. So in the risk assessment itself, as you're aware, risk is actually down to the level of impact and the level of vulnerability. So you then you draw the line there and say, is it high risk, medium risk, or low risk? And in the research that we did, and I hope I'm not giving away too much here, Ryan, but sea level rise was the critical one. Not just in Hong Kong, but remember it was a portfolio assignment. So we were looking across Southeast Asia and some of the other cities that Hongkong Land had investments in. And to be honest, the critical points were not so much in Hong Kong, but in other countries.
All right. Okay. So the report has already published for almost 2 years, right? So what you have done so far around in Hongkong Land to address the identified climate risk and any financial implication to the daily operation of your Hong Kong Land portfolio? So first question, I think actually after with the completion of climate risk assessment, so actually we incorporated climate risk into other corporate risk matrix. That means that it's a formally formed, it's integrated into corporate risk matrix as compared to other risks as well. So I think it's a corporate level instead of just doing a study. Because when you complete a study, actually what is the mitigation measures? So we are implementing the mitigation measure as recommended by Thomas' team. So actually, we are ongoing with the implementation as well. So regarding financial item, I think actually currently, of course, we maybe ingest some of the financial implication because you need to have to spend some money for the mitigation measures as well. But I think in parallel, it also gives us some opportunities. For example, issue of the green bonds and subsidy linked loans. So I think there are green finance tools and actually helping us to finance such of the mitigation measures. So I think the first thing actually maybe if the other corporations to consideration is whether you would have the determination to actually have the first step to have the review on your climate risk. After that, you can see what is the risk actually, and more importantly, what is your opportunities. So I think it's a mindset actually here we would like to share with us. So you are going to review the risk assessment for regular period, say 5 years or maybe 10 years? Yes. So actually, we review the risk measures for the climate risk actually regularly. So actually, with the certain period about 5 year time, actually we need to have we ran and actually we assess for the whole assessment as well. So I think it's because the assessment also due to some of the government regulations and actually some of the data availability and actually some of them maybe some of the development of the climate, what is the climate change impact on the even year. So that's what we choose every 5 years. Actually, we need to have a reassess actually for the whole climate risk assessment. But the silly question is that since the physical risk, right, is not yet happened, right? So you are still projecting 2050 or even later period, right? So what we need to update for the physical risk assessment, because that's still a projection, right? Not yet happened. So maybe Thomas can give us.
Yeah, I mean, for physical risk, it's mainly infrastructure. It's mainly kind of facilities that need to be upgraded or protected within the building, the property life cycle. And I think with most companies and Hong Kong Land included, I mean, they actually have built in cycles of capex and when you need to upgrade certain systems, etc. So it's really a case of how you merge the two, because it's not just about climate protection, it's also about how you maintain the business model as at the same time.
Right.
I think it's the same with probably with Julie's team and with Jessica's team. I mean, they have their teams who are looking at these annual cycles and 5-year cycles in terms of maintenance and capex. So for us, I mean, what the risk register helps is it points out, these are the assets that are vulnerable. These are the assets at risk, and in doing so, then two things. One, it helps kind of the board understand the capex needs, risk needs. Same time, it also, when you lower the risk levels, it actually lowers the premiums that you have to pay for insurance as well. So a lot of this is all kind of packaged together, CF, and but the starting point is to do the risk assessment, because if you don't do the risk assessment, you really have you don't have the information, you don't have the data in which to then present the case for either more capex or sustainable funding or lower premiums.
All right, thank you, Thomas. Right, yeah, you did teach me a lot, actually, right? So my last question from the time is running out, and last question, right? It's a question to Julie and Jessica, right? Yeah, the question is about how listed large corporate like NWS and MTR see the proposed climate disclosure standard by ISSB. I'm not familiar with this one, right? So are you, how ready are the Hong Kong companies to report against this new standard, right? Maybe Jessica first, right?
Well, the ISSB, the new standard, I think it's they would like to follow with the TCFD disclosure for listed company. And then they are now doing a very large-scale engagement sessions with different stakeholders to see whether it's feasible and possible to incorporate this in the like Hong Kong EX requirements for reporting, and also GLI reporting as well. And after looking at this requirements, I would say, for MTL, I would say we have already followed the TCFD requirements to disclose our relevant information in our sustainability report, I think back to 2020. And then, for the 4 core elements, we have already in place some of the measures and disclose our information. And for us, I think apart from the scenario analysis, because we are not fully follow the TCFD recommendation, but then we will progress, do it progressively as well in the next 2 or 3 years. But then we have already done some, studies on different premises in terms of climate risk on our own. So basically for us, I would say we are very, disclosing relevant information according to ISSB requirements or TCFD requirements. But then I think for some of the companies that haven't followed the TCFD disclosure or haven't, followed the requirements to prepare themselves, in terms of different, core elements required by the standard, they may take some time to think about that, because the requirements starting from the governance in the risk assessment, the strategies, and also the metrics that they have to, help them to reduce the climate risk. I think this takes a very long time. As Thomas said, it takes several months or even a year to conduct the assessment. So for company having started the process, yes, they have to, start earlier to prepare for this upcoming new requirements.
Right. Julie, how about you? Right.
I think I think Jessica has it all quite well covered, because I think for us, relatively, bigger companies, we are able to conduct more thorough studies, and we have, we're able to engage more, consultants to support us doing the assessment and all that. And yet it's very difficult. It's not like, it's not easy even for us, like, because the knowledge, the information availability, the capability of consultants, whatever. I mean, it is a lot of work there, I think. And I would suggest, if at all possible, that they come up with a simplified guideline, for smaller corporations, so that they can follow as well. Because I think it's important that everybody to have the climate risk assessed. Yet, does everybody have to, work on something so comprehensively? I mean, a lot of those climate assessment models and all that, could that be somewhat be available out there so that many corporate can take advantage of, and then they can scale it down to their own assets or like properties or whatever that is, and make reference out of the climate information or climate risk for the region. It will be very helpful, I think, for many companies, even for ourselves. I mean, we were spending so much resources on accessing this kind of information. So yeah, so I think that is my kind of thought of how to really, if we were to go forward with the recommendations in ISSB, I think we need more support in Hong Kong in general for the listed companies.
Somehow I agree with you that simplified assessment will be raise the awareness, right? So everybody will understand the risk that the climate change will brought to us.
And not everybody shares the same kind of level of risk. Some of the listed companies just don't have that kind of risk too. And so I think it will be very helpful to many people if some simplified version is available, a guide to really support these other companies.
Right, thank you. Time is running up, so thank you once again for all the sharing from the panelists. May I pass back the stage to Christy? Thank you.
Thank you to our speakers and moderator for the informative sharing. This also concludes the webinar. An event feedback questionnaire will be sent to you after this webinar. Please take a few moments to fill in the form. If you are interested to know more about future BEC events, please follow our social media channels. Thank you again for joining us today, and have a nice day.